Welcome, everybody. We'll get going here. My name is Matthew. I host the Junior Resource Investing Podcast. I'm pleased to be here today hosting another sixth panel, this one titled From Cradle to Grave, the Battery Lifecycle. A couple of just laundry list disclaimers and notes here. Please note that there is going to be a live Q&A at the end. Feel free at any time to stick your questions into the chat, and if I find a natural kind of moment to dovetail them in, I will do so. Otherwise, I'll make sure to carve off a few minutes at the end for your questions. Also note, of course, that this is being recorded and that the recording will be made available afterwards. And as always, please note all standard disclaimers apply. Metals are a bit of a paradox. Extracting them is incredibly energy intensive and environmentally impactful. But the only way for us to reduce our global emissions and rebuild society in an environmentally sustainable fashion is by dramatically upscaling the amount of metals we produce and use. When it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and greening our economy, the only way to get there is by committing to best practice battery metal resource extraction, building out substantially our production abilities, and closing the loop so that the end-of-life metals can be revitalized and returned as fresh supply to meet our ever-growing demand. To put it another way, the only way to get past our carbon-intensive reliance on minerals is through them, not around them. And of course, because of the natural tendencies, most metals can be used and reused in a practically infinite cycle. This circular economy, where the majority of our metal demand is met by existing supply within the system, is held up as an essential component of any future where we manage to meaningfully reduce our GHGs. However, the circular economy is a much broader concept than simply recycling your soup cans and your old phones. I'm quoting from a 2022 paper here from Hagel-Lucan and Goldman, and the quote is, "Circular economy means more than recycling. It is a conceptual approach on how to develop, design, distribute, use, repair, reuse, and finally recycle products." The point of that quote, I believe, is that the circular economy and what it entails is in actuality an entirely new rhetorical framework within which to approach our relationship with metals, stretching all the way from sustainable extraction and production to end-of-life recycling and revitalization. And so this is my transition here. I'm excited here. We have three gentlemen here that kind of take us from cradle to grave, right? We have Lyle Tritton. He is the manager of development for Giga Metals. We have Julian Traeger, president and CEO of Cotec Holdings, and then CEO Carlos Vicens of Full Circle Lithium. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining here today. The first question will be probably the simplest one of the day, and maybe we will start from cradle to grave. So, Lyle, I'll have you lead us off here. Do you just want to introduce yourself, introduce your companies, and then, more importantly, place them within the context of this discussion on the circular economy? How do you and your company contribute to the greening, low carbon reduction of waste in terms of metal and metal recycling? Lyle, I'll leave it to you.
Sure. Thanks, Matthew. I work with Giga Metals. I'm the manager of development. I oversee all the aspects of developing our large Turnagain nickel cobalt project in northern British Columbia. And we're on the end of being a raw materials producer to help get through this gap until a fully circular economy can be resolved. So we're looking to have a large-scale nickel sulfide concentrate mine in operation in the coming years and be supplying into a variety of nickel markets.
Excellent. And so I'll move to Julian. Julian has an interesting company with a couple of technologies that sort of places him with a foot in both worlds here, from the extractive industry to the recycling industry. Julian, do you want to introduce us to Cotec?
Sure. And thank you, Matthew, for having me on this panel. So, Cotec is our attempt, and hopefully very successful it will be, to create a sort of eBay or an Amazon of the commodity extraction sector. So we're taking stakes in a revolutionary process technologies and then applying them to assets which are not valued in the commodity extraction space, a major focus of which is waste. We think that waste is going to become the sort of valued asset very rapidly. And so we've invested so far in 4 technologies, and we have 3 assets, and all of those assets are involved in recycling. We're not focused on battery minerals per se. We have a green iron, a green steel division, but we are also going to be producing green recycled copper. And most importantly and most advanced, we have a business to recycle processed rare earths and magnets, which are going to be used obviously in electric vehicles. So we're super excited about the whole recycling space, because one of the things is that even if you were to build a lot of new mines, they're not going to come online fast enough for the world's needs. But with recycling, the life cycle is so much shorter that you can start to really provide some of the supply gap, which is very important.
Excellent, Julian. Thank you. And Carlos, full circle, you just want to lead us through your company?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. So Full Circle Lithium is the newest processing and manufacturer of lithium compounds. We're situated in Georgia in U.S. We have a processing lithium carbonate manufacturing plant already installed in Georgia, and we now have 3 distinct business to feed that plant. And we have 2 recycling businesses. One is geared towards I would say chemical and manufacturing waste of material, and the other one will be a recycling of batteries. And the third line of business that we are working on is what we call lithium refinery. So the lithium refinery business is anything that has to do with raw material processing that does not come from recycling or urban mining, as we call it as well. And in addition to that, we've also been able to develop an innovative new fire suppressant solution that addresses a lot of the, I would say, issues that lithium-ion batteries have been having in terms of fires and hazardous, I would say, events recently.
No, thank you, gentlemen. So, I mean, Lyle, I'll kick it back to you, right? I mean, so as you discussed, Giga is this, advanced nickel developer, and I hope the point I was making with my little introduction there is that while it might seem on the surface maybe counterintuitive to have a nickel developer on a circular economy panel, it actually isn't, right? That companies like Giga are actually a fundamental part of the solution for this issue. And I think that this is the question I have for you, Lyle, then is, the simple fact is that the circular economy just wouldn't work right now. We need immense more amounts of nickel. And so my question to you then is can you answer how much more nickel is required to enter into our economy to achieve that true circularity, in terms of demand 10 or 20 years from now? And maybe, to just kind of complicate things here for you a bit, but, how many multiples of current nickel in the economy does that represent?
Sure. Thanks, Matthew. And I'll get to some numbers in a minute. But, we look forward to an economy that's largely circular in the coming decades. But that's going to be a ways off because we have growing use cases. Stainless steel consumption, battery consumption are growing, and we have long use lifespans. And so that creates a bit of a dilemma. Nickel-containing stainless steel is highly recyclable, but it's often in use for many decades. One of the most famous examples of stainless steel use is the Chrysler building in New York. It's 93 years old. That full stainless facade is still in use. I come from a refinery, nickel refinery, that's 70 years old. Most of the original piping and tankage is still in use. So that material has not yet entered the recycling stream. And that's true of nickel-containing stainless steel in a wide range of uses. Now we see a new big use case for batteries with a range of chemistries, including high nickel, low nickel, no nickel. But what we see is that battery lifespans in EVs are growing. There's a second life market as grid storage that's growing, with companies looking to repurpose EV batteries when they're no longer in use. It's a great thing to do in the whole 3R approach to things. And a growing share of the world transportation fleet, including both light and increasingly heavy-duty vehicles, being battery-driven. So, with those factors, recycled materials are important, but not poised to be the dominant supply for at least 30 years. In the meantime, we need new materials, and we need those new materials to be developed in the most responsible way, and that's where Giga comes in. We have the ability to produce a high-quality nickel intermediate product with a very low carbon intensity in a Western jurisdiction, and that's really key to an expanding demand in North America and the Western world more globally. Recycling, of course, is never perfect. I am an extractive metallurgist by background, so unless we enter an era of falling demand at some point, there's still always going to be a place for new materials as well. So to get to the raw numbers, there's a big challenge. the IEA's 2023 Energy Technology Perspectives report suggested a doubling of the 2021 global nickel consumption by 2050 to achieve net zero. Will we achieve net zero? I can't say I'm high on hopes that we will, but we certainly should be striving to. I put a note out on LinkedIn in the last week that shows North America expecting to have 1,000 gigawatt hours of annual battery production capacity by the year 2030. It's not all going to be high nickel batteries, but with the current global mix, which includes lots of LFP in China and a growing but not yet full uptake of the high nickel forms of NCM, the North American battery demand alone, just batteries, just North America production, looks to be over 400,000 tons per year of nickel in 2030. It's 3 times the total North American production today. And that's when EVs are expected to be only 50% of new sales. Demand will grow from there. So we've got 20, 30, 40 years of high raw material demand to build the pipeline that will eventually be the circular economy.
No, excellent. And Carlos, I'll pass it to you then. Similar sort of question, but just replace nickel with lithium, right? Look, forward-looking kind of here projections. How much lithium is required to enter the economy to achieve that sort of circular effect?
He's on mute.
Sorry, Carlos. Yes, you're on mute. Thanks, Julian.
Apologize for that. Even before we started the conversation, we were discussing what a circular economy definition is, and it's hard to have a pretty, I would say, exact, definition of that. But as Lau was talking about, I think everybody's shooting for that 2040 to 2050 year time frame. But there's the difficulty of getting to that number there in 2040, where we don't even know what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years in certain mines and financing, and the way the capital markets are today. It's pretty hard to put a number to it. However, the numbers for lithium nowadays are looking at anywhere around the 3 to 4 million tons of lithium carbonate equivalent. And today we're around 700,000 or 800,000 tons of production. So we're looking at anywhere between 7 to 8 to even potentially 10 times what current market is today. Just to put that into perspective, that's roughly, if we're looking at just numbers of mines, this is about 70 to 80 mines of 50,000 tons each. That is a massive, massive ask for the lithium industry. And when we really think about it, there's less than a dozen mines today. And we're asking over the next 5-10 years, I would say, for it to be 80 mines that are, on average, much higher than the current production. So, it is a hard ask. It's going to take a lot of, I would say, juniors to succeed, as well as some consolidation and capital markets to rally with these miners, and just to put some of those numbers in perspective as well, in terms of what that number may look like in terms of financing. There are and just taking numbers that have been put out into the market. I was last week at Benchmarks Week in LA, and they were looking at the amount of capital that needs to be raised up to only 2030, and they're looking at $600 billion for the entire industry. When I say the entire industry, that would include the downstream, the batteries, and the upstream. And if we look at the upstream only, which is talking about mines, the lithium space is anywhere between 30 and 40 billion of investments that's needed to get to that, 3 to 4 million tons. And that is asking quite a bit when you have the markets that we have today, in terms of the financing capabilities of the capital markets and all the other players. So we will see what that's going to take, how that's going to, I would say, evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. But suffice to say, the current market environment it's not geared towards raising that type of money, meaning that prices would tend to go higher before some of these mines get financed. So these most likely will get pushed down the line as we see financing coming into the market.
No, thank you, Carlos. And so, Julian, the question I have for you is a little bit kind of a half step removed here. That we've established that that short of a dramatic fall in quality of life, that we need more supply coming online over the coming years and decades. But so, I mean, a big part of this is that then actually reducing carbon emissions from the extractive industries themselves, right? That's part of the solution of this problem. And so I think, that Julian, you have a couple of projects. I'm thinking here specifically your heap leach technology, and then also your iron ore project as well, that I think maybe you could speak to if you wanted to, in terms of how COTEC with your different projects are accomplishing this emission reduction strategy.
Sure, with pleasure, Matthew. I think just going back to the point of the last two gentlemen, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to make the carbon targets. I mean, the reality is that the public markets are actually moving away from taking risk and funding development precisely at the moment where that's most necessary. So unless governments step in a major way, or OEMs, I actually don't know what the solution is. But you're right, Matt. Reducing the carbon emissions from existing primary production can assist that. And what we're finding with the technologies that we've been investing in is a commonality which uses much less heat, much less water. The capex costs are about 20% of historic capex costs with these new technologies, and they are modular and more flexible. And so I think we're going to see a century where we can capture economies of flexibility rather than what we saw in the last century, economies of scale. So in the iron ore space, we have green technologies which can concentrate fines in iron ore, and then we have another technology which can pelletize and make the pellets for the DR feed at ambient room temperatures, and the carbon footprint of that is much lower. And then in copper, we have a green way of leaching low-grade copper from tailings and dumps. And then most exciting of all, we have this technology which can extract magnets from existing e-waste, put it in a sort of centrifuge with hydrogen, and out drops processed rare earth in the form of a dust, which we can reconcentrate and make new magnets from. And that's a way to utilize the embedded inventory of magnets in the developed economies to avoid some of the non-green aspects of rare earth processing, which can be very polluting. So I think that is part of it. Another part is obviously to make things last longer, to be more durable, and graphite and graphene can do a lot of that as well. But ultimately, there is this big demand-supply gap. And these technologies can ameliorate that, but there is going to be a moment of truth where prices may have to go up, but there's still such a long lead time for new mines to be permitted and financed and come on board, which is super concerning. Recycling can address a little bit of that, but it's not the whole solution.
No, well said, gentlemen. And so this is a good segue here. We're talking about the need for potentially changing the regulatory framework within which we operate, right? And in terms of what we emphasize or not. There's a good question from the audience here from Esgoff, I assume is going for there. Apologies if I mispronounced that. And I'm not sure who to ask this for. Maybe I'll just kind of throw it out there and let you gentlemen kind of pick away at it. But are any nations actually providing subsidies for metal recycling at this moment?
Well, I mean, I think there are really only 3 nations in the world that are spending major amounts of money to address the supply chain issues. It's the US, the Inflation Reduction Act. We've got Canada, mainly Quebec, and they've started a new fund, which is yet to get going. And then I think Saudi Arabia. And I think all of those people are interested in recycling, and they will put subsidies in place. I think Europe has certain requirements coming in terms of the percentage of recycled metals, but it's far from a global phenomenon.
Yeah, I agree with that, Julian, and I think the governments are starting to help, and the grants in the U.S. have become, I would say, very important for some of these startups or companies that are starting to get into the recycling space to access some type of financing to move their projects forward to start the recycling process. However, there still needs to be a lot more to be done, both on the consumer side. So it's a push and pull kind of thing where you have, you're pushing the consumers to be obviously recycle their batteries and help the industry, but you also need to help the recyclers potentially have some sort of benefit recycling. And then we talk about recycled material. Is that going to be trading at par or at a premium to material that comes from the mine? That's another story, and I guess another discussion that we could have. But that's something that could potentially come into the industry as we move forward, because I would say the greener lithium or the greener nickel or the greener graphite or the greener whatever you want to call it in terms of recycling product may garner a premium going forward based on certain amount of help from governments and other participants in the industry.
And that's the idea. Sorry, Lyle, you go. Yep.
Yeah, so just touch on a couple of aspects there. Julian was quite right that there is some support being given. We're seeing that to recycling companies today to build out their supply chains and facilities. It's not huge yet because it's a nascent industry, but I think more importantly is what we're seeing in the European Union with their battery regulations, which really have two key aspects that impact this discussion. One is that they're going to require a certain amount of recycled material, which will increase over time. So that will be critically important. And two is that they're bringing in carbon footprint requirements, which will start with, stating the carbon footprint of your battery product and then working with limits to reduce it. And of course, recycled materials will come with a lower carbon footprint than virgin materials almost all the time. So that's really going to help not just that recycling industry, but also those that have an inherently low greenhouse gas footprint for their product as virgin material as well.
If I may add something, Matthew, I mean, one of the great exciting things about electric vehicles and batteries is it's a relatively new industry. So it can be designed quite well to be recycled. You can require the OEMs, you can require the people making the batteries to put that in place, which I think is a great advantage, because traditional recycling suffers from the fact that things haven't been designed to be recycled, and B, the supply chain for scrap is not always the most institutional and corporatized, and that's a major hindrance to the consolidation and the respectability of the sector. But the battery space actually has this great opportunity to be, proper and less a scrap metal like right from the beginning, which I think will really serve it well.
No, thank you, gentlemen. And just for the point of fact, I actually have, I think these are CEID recommendations for 2025 to be binding, 50% of lithium to be recycled and all the way up to 90% of aluminum to be recycled from batteries, just for the sake of conversation. So there was a decent segue back in there, Lyle. I wanted to return to you. You talked about, low GHG actual production of new metals. So Giga, I find interesting, and this is where I'll ask you to touch on this. So whether formally reflected in your recent PFS or not, do you just want to discuss ways that all the different steps that Giga is taking to reduce its own GHG impact or otherwise environmental impact?
Sure, Matthew, I'd love to. It's a key point for us and for our investors and potential partners that we're talking to. That we've got a few major project attributes that we're focused on to achieve very low greenhouse gas production. Firstly, we've got a great strength here in Canada, which is our great clean power supply. Being in British Columbia, connecting to the BC grid, and I'll note that our pre-feasibility study includes the estimated full cost of building the transmission extension required without subsidy from levels of government that may well come. That will give us the ability to economically maximize the electrification of our facility. And we all know that a decarbonized world is an electrified world. We've got a pretty significant power demand in the mill, and so it's important for that. But we're looking beyond that, and we've gone as far as selecting, at some increased capital, fully electric mining shovels and drills, and we've added both capital cost and, frankly, some restrictions within our mine development to adopt trolley assist diesel haul trucks in the mine, which significantly reduces diesel burn. We know trolleys work. Look at the streetcars in Toronto. We don't actually ever expect to use those because the manufacturers are today testing full battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell trucks in the size range we need. They will become commercially available, and we think trolley assist is a natural fit with these technologies. So it's sort of a no-lose to bring forward the engineering around that now. But I can't put it in a 43101 report because nobody's selling them today. What's the price? I like battery over hydrogen just as a default because it's inherently much more efficient, but we could go either way, and we could make hydrogen from that clean BC electricity as well for equipment that's maybe not best suited to full battery operation. Dozers and graders might be better suited with a hydrogen approach. On top of that sort of equipment end of things, our deposit has inherently a very low strip ratio, 0.4, which just means we move less material. And that's really critical when you think about the energy that you expend in blowing with, digging up that rock and moving it to process or to waste. The difference between our 0.4 and a more typical strip ratio of 2, for example, for large copper porphyry mines, is moving about 50 million tons a year of waste in our project. That's a huge amount of material that you're not excavating and hauling. We're also looking towards further improvements in some of the minor aspects, like cold climate heat pumps that will allow us to eliminate the combustion of propane for building heat. But for now, we've left the propane in the project, to be conservative on that greenhouse gas footprint. That reduction of fossil combustion, though, is the key to reducing our total greenhouse gas footprint. Despite increasing the strip ratio from the PEA by 100%, we were at 0.2 in the PEA under PEA rules, and taking more conservative assumptions around the use of support fleets, we've actually reduced the greenhouse gas footprint of our project by 20%. And then we have an ace up our sleeve in that the host rocks of our deposit, the ultramafic minerals that hold the nickel sulfides and that end up as finely ground tailings, are naturally reactive with carbon dioxide, sequestering the CO2 as mineral carbonates, just pulling it straight out of the air, the world's easiest direct air capture. And that's the most permanent form of CCS. It's not going to burn up in a forest fire. It's not going to leak out of the ground. And then, lastly, when it comes to downstream processing, nickel sulfide concentrate, such as we would produce, has an inherent advantage. It contains energy in the form of sulfur. So when you smelt it, for example, you burn that sulfur and get energy out of it. When you want to if you want to oxidize it in an autoclave, you're oxidizing that sulfur and gaining energy out of it. So it can be less energy intensive and less greenhouse gas intensive to process compared to other nickel forms like laterites or other nickel minerals that don't contain that inherent energy. So a lot of great attributes we're focused on. Ultimately, the downstream processing, that's somebody else, and we're in conversations about that. We're focused on our own project. Can we get to net zero at the Turnagain site? Yeah, might be possible.
Interesting, and yeah, a lot of different details to consider there. Carlos, I'm gonna switch gears here a bit, and I'll ask your thoughts almost on a more philosophical level. But you are in the industry of lithium recycling, and I mean, and that stat I just threw out there of the aspirational 50% lithium recycling isn't enough to achieve a circular effect. And so, I mean, I guess what needs to happen? Push-pull factors. If you want to talk about government regulatory changes, what do you see having to change in terms of how society in terms of self-governance or formal governance? What needs to change?
Well, we look at it globally as well. I mean, even though we're operating in the U.S., I mean, you look at the composition of the batteries and the style of batteries. Obviously, you got the high nickel-based batteries, which are important for high output on different cars, but mostly those cars are not accessible for the majority of the people. So we want to really have EVs being a reality for everybody. We need a lot of these cars to be in a price range that they're currently not in, meaning below the, in around the $30,000 to $40,000 range. And those batteries would be LFP batteries or something that is accessible, or LFPMs, which is a sort of manganese style of LFP. The problem with LFP batteries is that it's lithium iron phosphate. And lithium iron phosphate does not contain nickel, does not contain cobalt, and it does not contain all these other base metals that are very important for the recycling industry. Meaning the current battery recycling industry today is only focused on recycling cobalt, nickel, and other copper, aluminum from the battery. They don't care about lithium, because once you go into the process of dismantling and crushing the battery, a lot of that lithium is lost in the what they call the black mass, and they're not recovering today anywhere near that, even 50%. So they're recovering anywhere between 20-30% or even lower in some cases. They sell to a smelter, and it's not really clean. Now, granted, we're at the beginnings of the recycling industry. The recycling really hasn't started. A lot of the end-of-life batteries from EVs and others are starting to come to market. There's going to be a lot of, I would say, off-spec material coming to effect, off-spec batteries and off-spec cathode materials and so forth. And I think there needs to be a very important, I would say, focus on how to, like you're saying in your comment, recycle lithium as well as other materials, specifically on different, I would say, chemistries of batteries. LFP being one of them. Just remember that China, 2/3 of all their batteries they produce today, and they ship overseas, a lot of them, are LFP batteries. And it's not going away. I think right now in Europe and in the US, it's only about 50, I would say around 15% of LFP chemistry. That's going to grow. Now, granted, all of the batteries are going to grow in tandem, but the LFP percentage of the total batteries is going to grow. And there's, depending on who you ask, it can go anywhere between 30 and 50%. Now, 50, I think it's too high in our market, but let's say it's 30 to 40%. That is an enormous amount of batteries that today are not recyclable, or nobody wants them to recycle. Our company is focused on trying to recycle LFP batteries and try to recycle the largest amount of lithium within that battery. So we're looking at way above 50%. In fact, we're targeting 80 to 90% on the recyclability of those batteries. Now, there needs to be a lot. We're still in some, I would say, development stage and research stage in terms of how to do it, but we developed a solution that when we take apart the batteries, the lithium goes into solution, other materials go into solution. That's how we are able to recover the majority of the lithium. So, independent of what, we may believe that the industry is doing today, it needs to get a lot better in terms of recyclability of all materials and do it in a way that is obviously beneficial for everybody, including the environment.
Excellent. And so, next round of questions here. There was an interesting conversation prior to going live where we were discussing, or you gentlemen were discussing the complexities and challenges preventing recycling and preventing us from achieving this circularity, right? And so there is this clear and demonstrable need for technical innovation to kind of square that circle. And so I thought, Julian, this is obviously an opportunity for you if you wish to what is the chief problem you are solving with Cotec, and if that you can absolutely answer it that way, or just in general, what's a technological innovation that you're excited by, or you think needs to occur for this to continue to move forward?
Well, I think for recycling to be able to move forward, we need a number of items. First of all, I think we do need to have some sort of consensus around technology. Every other week there's a new invention around a new battery. Which I think makes it very difficult to plan a 10, 20-year horizon. People need to, maybe it's not going to be the best, but at least we can decide what the standard's going to be. I think the other thing that's necessary in certain commodities, is if governments can provide puts on pricing, particularly like for rare earths, but also potentially for materials where the Chinese dominate supply. There's a lot of fear of dumping and driving Western competition out of business. And so there needs to be a pricing mechanism which provides a sort of parachute or a safety net, rather, the other way around, for people to be able to move forward. I think the sooner we come forward with a carbon tax, that's obviously going to benefit recycling in a major way. And then, regulating a responsibility for OEMs to be responsible for the recycling of what they produce, I think would be another great innovation. I think, what we're doing at Cotec, I'm super excited about it. In Canada alone, there are 10,000, mines that have been closed with tailings and material within them. They are gashes on the environment. They are wounds on the surface of our planet. They represent an enormous liability for the government. And this is just in Canada, that's true for other nations. So to the extent recycling can cheaply take what's considered to be a liability and waste and extract the necessary raw materials for the next couple of decades and ameliorate the historic problems of the mining sector, I think that's a great win-win, where we can make a lot of money for our shareholders, and the margins are enormous. But we can also, help cool the planet and help the governments deal with these enormous liabilities. And I think most of all, it's going to be the key over the next couple of decades to the way in which the world perceives the commodity extraction space. To the extent that we are there beautifying, ameliorating, using, not wasting, not destroying. We have a whole different semiology which we can communicate with the general public. And I honestly think that recycling is the key to the re-rating of our sector over the next couple of decades. But it's going to happen slowly, and it's got to be shown. It's no use talking. There's too much talk about green transition and all this mouthing off, and there's absolutely no money and not enough is being done. I think when it comes to recycling, we need to do it and then talk about it.
Yeah, excellent. And so, Carlos, I'll actually swing this one back to you, and I'll let Lyle finish on a more general note. But Carlos, so kind of the same structural setup for the question. Feel free to expand it on a more universal scale, but then, of course, feel free to kind of tie it back to full circle as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree 100% with Julian saying in terms of let's do it and let's talk about it. There's been a lot of talk and no action by all participants, including ourselves, in terms of our competitors and what we're trying to do, and not much going on. And there's been some massive failures, both on the upstream side and the downstream side. And these failures have, haven't gone unnoticed by the financing community. So, what we're trying to do is essentially try to do things more efficiently. We know for a fact that there's going to be a lot more mining within these commodities that we're trying to develop to get to our greener space. Nickel, cobalt, lithium, graphite. There's going to be 150 to 200 more mines that need to come up in order to make this industry be a real industry. Now, if we do it more efficiently on a per ton basis from now on, we're going to be a lot more better off than the status quo. And that is exactly where we need to be. Look, I was very, when I was in my prior company at Neolithium, where we had an upstream mine in Argentina, everybody was talking about how is your project going to be greener and so forth. We're already green. We're extracting from the ground. We're trying to be as green as possible in terms of not using all the chemicals, and it's an evaporation technique where it doesn't include any type of reagents, and we're still being asked and say, look, I mean, we're getting there, but it just takes time. right? So in my mind, in my own opinion, technologies are starting to happen in all sorts, including in our case, in the recycling side. But a lot of these have already been available for many, many years. And what Julian's saying, let's start doing it instead of talking about it. I think that's exactly where we need to be. Now, the problem that I see, and I think this goes back to your earlier question, Matthew, is how are we going to get the push and pull to happen? Meaning, the consumers of this battery, how are they going to help us recycle? Are they going to participate here? And at the top, in the government side, or the participants or the stakeholders that are pushing the capital down, how are we going to get that money into the hands of the most efficient companies out there? And that is a question that will get resolved, because you're going to get all the oil and gas companies are starting to participate in this industry, at least in the battery and the lithium space and the recycling space. You got a lot of the, I would say, chemical companies as well as trying to participate. The mining giants are starting to try to come in. So we will see how that evolves over time. But I envision the industry as it is over the next 5 to 10, 15 years is going to change dramatically for the better. It's just going to take time for everybody to kind of get up and do their thing. But obviously we need everybody to participate and give their very best to get this where we want it to be.
Excellent, gentlemen. And Lyle, yeah, obviously, just on a more general note, is there anything that just regarding the the broader aspects or concerns of recycling that you'd like to expand upon here?
Yeah, for sure. The team has identified this quite clearly, that evolving chemistry is a real challenge for developing a robust, functional recycling ecosystem. You risk stranding a bunch of capital building a plant that won't be in use in 10 years because battery chemistry has changed, things like that. And so, maybe the hardcore capitalists won't like this, but I'm going to take a swing left. The solution to this is regulation. And there's two key aspects there. Like the EU battery regulation that's driving a certain percentage of recycled material, that's really important. But there's also other aspects like, all the talk recently about right to repair laws. So maybe we don't have to throw out the batteries so fast, because, you can actually repair one instead of throwing it away and buying a new one. And extended producer responsibility is really key. If you make the car company or the battery company responsible for that material all the way through its end of life, that gives them an incentive to not just think through disassembly and economic recycling, but also the stability of their processing, so that although we might not have a standard, this is the battery everybody uses, like we've gone to USB-C in Europe instead of the Apple Lightning connector, it may force each manufacturer to say, look, this is what we're going to stick with because we're responsible to make sure it's managed throughout its entire life cycle. And this way there's, a rational recycling end of it. Europe is, as usual, further ahead on these aspects than North America. Will we get there here? I have some hope that we will, because the goal is for everybody the same thing: a livable planet. And a livable planet doesn't come by piling up mountains of batteries and digging great big holes in the ground to support building bigger mountains. It comes from actually achieving that circularity.
Excellent, gentlemen. So just one last call here for questions. If anybody has any questions, please put them in. I've just got one more. This is almost just for my own curiosity, gentlemen. So just a question I have for you three, and I'll let you again kind of choose or fight amongst yourselves. But due to chemical, physical aging processes, my understanding is that they can be difficult or expensive to recover cathode material. And so I guess I have a couple of questions based around that fact, if that's an accepted fact. Is this, is there different types of batteries, different types of cathode materials that this is a bigger or smaller problem in? And then B, is there tech that's actively being pursued to make this cheaper that you gentlemen are aware of? And again, I'll let whoever kind of wants to jump in there.
Well, let me just jump in real quickly. As an extractive metaller, I'm not fussed about that as far as it comes to the NMC, NCA type batteries. The recycling process of the future for those is going to be hydrometallurgical, most likely to get high lithium recovery, and you're going to fully dissolve the nickel, cobalt, manganese, etc. in acid and recover them with a very high recovery rate. It's going to be well over 90%. The pyrometallurgical processes today also don't care about aging. They're high energy intensity. You melt the whole thing down. You might not get the lithium back, but the metals, the nickel, cobalt, manganese, you'll get back. So, that aging aspect, not an issue in my mind for a true recycling process.
And if I would add, I think, and I agree with Lyle in terms of the NCMs and NCA batteries. The problem here lies, as I mentioned before, in the LFP batteries, and it will depend on what type of chemistries we're utilizing over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years. I think the industry will tend to move towards a solution that will be comprehensive in all of its forms, from the manufacturing to the reuse and to the recycling. I would tend to think that at some point the LFP battery recycling, cathode recycling would be I would say efficient, and at a point where everybody makes money in terms of the people that are recycling the battery, as well as the OEMs, to put that into their cars in order to sell the cars. So all that's going to have to be handled in a way that's I would say makes the most sense for everybody, but it's not going to happen in the short term. Short term, there's going to be a lot of, I would say, chaos and volatility. And another aspect of it as well is graphite. And I know you asked about the cathode side, but the anode side, in terms of the graphite, there's a lot of it within the battery, and we need to make sure that part of that is also recyclable, or at least we're able to use that in a different way. So it's a comprehensive issue. How are we going to attack this going forward? And I guess the recyclers and the OEMs need to work in tandem in order to make these things a lot more efficient going forward. So, but I agree that the cathode material is recyclable. Granted, some are better than others in terms of economic returns for the people that are recycling this, but there's going to have to be a solution for each type of these cathodes.
Thank you, Carlos.
I just think from my side, human ingenuity is extraordinary. If people focus on something, we will come up with a solution. But I think it's got to be designed up front to be solved. And I think that's coming in terms of, in creating the design for batteries which are easily sorted out at end of life.
Actually, intentionality of design is an interesting and remarkably simple solution too, rather elegant. So we do have a question here from the audience, Oren Peter. Just again, I don't want to. I'll let you gentlemen. I'm not sure if I have anybody I want to specifically. This is a general question from Oren. He's asking, why are car companies so late on this adoption, right? He's suggesting or worried that, in fact, they are actually slowing production investment when they need to be going the opposite direction and accelerating it. And just, is there any general thoughts from you guys on that concept?
I think, the electric vehicles are very expensive, and we've talked about this. And so the adoption rate is slower than a lot of car companies were expecting. A lot of them are having challenges, they're losing money. And so for economic reasons, they're having to slow down. I think that's what's happening.
I would say that's really a bit of a North American phenomenon, Matthew. They're certainly not slowing down in China. What we've got here is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. A lot of people don't want to buy electric cars because they're concerned about range and ability to recharge on the road, and will the chargers work and things like that. We all love going on our summer road trip. And that creates a bit of a concern for people, understandable. So we need to be building out charging infrastructure to enable people to get rid of that aspect. On the cost side, I think, there's a cost perspective right now that EVs are more expensive. In the long run, if you're able to charge at home, they might well have a lower life cycle cost. But Carlos and Julian, you've both touched on the same issue I touched on, is we need to recycle all the kinds of batteries. And what you might end up seeing in this is where we are with tires and lead acid batteries today. In order to create that recycling, that full circular economy, what have we done? Well, we now pay a deposit on those materials, and you bring your lead acid battery back to the shop and you get your deposit back. If nickel containing batteries are fully economic to recycle anyway, well, there is an economic driver there. But if our concern is that, the say LFP batteries aren't being recycled because they're not economic, maybe that extended producer responsibility approach where there's a deposit goes in, maybe it's $3,000 on your battery. Yeah, it's going to make the car more expensive, but it's going to ensure that there's an economic rationale for the person who owns the car at the end of life to make sure it gets back into the supply chain. They get their $3,000 back. And that will actually drive some cost parity as well, which will change the dynamics again. I have no answers to this, but it's a potential outcome.
And if I were to add, I agree. I mean, some of the comments here, but if I were to add, this is a new industry. Car companies, OEMs, are now becoming almost a software company more than anything. Look at Tesla. Tesla has a totally different mentality than any of the older OEMs, and the other OEMs are trying to become somewhat like Tesla. But in a much larger way, because they just have an enormous amount of manufacturing capacity, like Volkswagen, for example, and so forth. So they're changing internally, and it has taken them a long time to change their mentality, how to do things differently, how to think about sourcing materials. Are we going to go down to the mine? Are we not going to go down to the mine? Are we going down to processing or not processing? They used to just call up and say, send me some steel, send me an engine, send me this, nowadays it's just totally different. This is a car that has essentially a battery and a computer inside. That's it, nothing else. I mean, obviously, I'm simplifying a lot, but that's what it is. Where before you had 2,000 parts, now you have. I mean, there's a significant less amount of parts within a car nowadays, but it's a much, I would say, comprehensive type of car. And I think that OEMs and the supply chain are just starting, and they have slowed down a little bit because just the macro environment has not helped recently, inflation and so forth. So the financeability of anything nowadays, including cars, is much harder than it was even 12 months ago. Even more so 4 months ago. So we were going to see these cycles coming up, but at the end of the day, as we move forward, I think this is not going to slow down. I think the ship has left port here, and some way, form, shape, or another, EVs are here to stay. Is it going to be 30, 40, 50, 100%? That's where we can debate. I don't think it's going to be 100%. In my own opinion, it's going to be somewhere in between, or in and around that. But I think the ship has left port, and as OEMs become smarter, and part of this new transition, you're going to see these OEMs and the industry kind of march into that new, I would say, way of doing business within the car manufacturing business.
Yeah, excellent. Well, gentlemen, I think that brings it to the end here. There's no more questions from the audience. I want to thank all three of you. It was an excellent, articulate, and insightful conversation, and thank you for your time, guys, and have a good day.